The impact on indigenous black people. The land redistribution under the Homestead Act often belonged to indigenous communities, including black indigenous tribes who had lived on and cultivated these lands for centuries. While the government waged campaigns to remove native people from their ancestral land, black indigenous people in particular faced double displacement. Not only were they uprooted from their homes, but their historical ties to the land were also erased by policies that prioritized white ownership. Even free black Americans who were technically eligible for the Homestead Act were excluded from benefiting. Systematic racism in the form of discriminating policies, violence, and intimidation, particularly from groups like the Ku Klux Klan, made it nearly impossible for black families to claim land in many regions. Furthermore, the logistical challenges of relocating to remote, hostile territories without resources left most black Americans unable to participate. The creation of the racial wealth gap. The Homestead Act represented one of the earliest and most significant transfers of wealth in American history. While white settlers accumulated land, wealth, and economic stability, black Americans were systematically excluded from this process. Land ownership had long been a cornerstone of wealth building in the United States, and the inability of black Americans to access this opportunity had devastating long-term consequences. By the end of the 19th century, many white families had established farms, businesses, and generational wealth through the Homestead Act. Meanwhile, black Americans were left behind, confined to sharecropping, tenant farming, and urban poverty. This systematic exclusion ensured that the wealth gap between white and black Americans would grow over time, compounded by additional policies like redlining, Jim Crow laws, and urban renewal projects. A legacy of injustice. The Homestead Act of 1862 was more than a land policy. It was a racial policy, whether intentionally designed as such or not. It provided Europeans and their descendants a massive economic head start, while simultaneously ensuring that black Americans and indigenous people were excluded from America's prosperity. This history is not merely a relic of the past. The racial wealth gap that began during this period has only widened, as systematic barriers to wealth building for black Americans continue to this day. Recognizing the true history of the Homestead Act is critical to understanding the economic disparities that persist and the work required to achieve justice and equity. The Homestead Act was a powerful tool that shaped the United States, but it came at the expense of the indigenous and black communities whose land, labor, and lives were sacrificed to create the wealth of others. To ignore this history is to ignore the roots of inequality that continues to define America.
You gotta pick, me or her.
My people been on this land for over 400 years.